Hello, and welcome to Seeking Heaven, the Near-Death Experience and Other Phenomena. I'm your host, six-time near-death experiencer, Tamara Calder Richardson, as well as an evidential medium and Christ channeler, afterlife speaker, among many other things. So I wanted to welcome you to the channel. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and watch the episodes. They're a lot of fun. I have episodes from near-death experiencers like myself, as well as out-of-body experiences, spiritually transformative experiences, UFO encounters. We're going to have a lot of that in the fall with some really well-known people. And we even have some fairy and unicorn experts coming on. Yes, that's right. We got to have a little fun too on this show. So I figured, that'll be around, October, because October's coming up and I don't want it to be scary. And that's going to be a tremendous amount of fun. Mermaids, unicorns, and fairies. And UFOs. Who could beat that? And if I could throw in some Bigfoot, where it's a perfect October. So welcome and thank you for being here. If you haven't checked out the membership perks, your donations and your support of this channel, watching and comments and liking makes all the difference. And this channel is just really blowing up. And I just thank you guys so much. I do this out of a passion to help other near-death experiences tell their story, and also to have a spiritual community so we can have some fun and grow in a safe, non-judgmental place. So let me tell you a little bit about today. I've been really excited, and we've had to change it a couple times because I've had this horrible cold cough crud that's going around. So she's been so patient to move things around with me, and I feel like my heart just has known her forever, and she's a lovely person. Let me tell you a bit about our speaker before I bring her on. Her name is Brooke Groves. Now, you might have seen, she's a near-death experiencer. You might have seen her interviews on other podcasts. She's phenomenal. We're going rogue today. We're going to talk about healing. We're talking about, coming from the dark side of the, I don't know, the moon. I don't know, but, to really becoming an enlightened, loving spiritual being. And when you see, and I was telling Brooke, when you see her, you think she's perfect, but she had no perfect life. So she's a phenomenal person. So let me tell you a little bit about her. She's a former psychotherapist. She has advanced degrees in clinical psychology. She's a marriage and family therapy and clinical art therapist with numerous postgraduate and multidisciplinary certifications, including, but not limited to, transpersonal psychology, deep psychology, depth psychology, neuroscience. And she is also, she has her own business. She has a private practice. So we'll give you that information below if you want to set up something with her. And she's able to use her intuition with her abilities that she's gained. She'll tell you about that, to empower the human consciousness. And she works with love and light. And she is here to tell us about her near-death experience, about a life-threatening disease and what she recalled during that time, including also having a glimpse of seeing her children. She didn't even plan to have children. Seeing her children on the other side. How amazing. So I'm going to bring on Brooke. Hey, Brooke, thank you for being here.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You've been so patient. Us rescheduling everything, and I still sound like a frog a little bit, but you're going to be doing most of the talking because I want to hear so much about you, and you have quite a journey and a story. So tell me, before we get into our NDE, can you set it up to tell us a little bit? I mean, you have obviously a lot of training, and you've done a lot of healing on yourself, and now you help others, which God bless you. We need more. Hey, look, this is what I tell people. If you're going to tell someone, hey, I don't think drugs is good, stop doing drugs, you kind of almost need to be a former drug addict to understand that. So true that. And, right. So you need to, and a lot of people that watch these near-death experiences, and we talked a little bit at pre-show, that they go, wow, they just seem like they got it together and they got all the answers and they're spiritual leaders. A lot of us went through the pooper before we got here. I'm not saying we're perfect now. We're just sort of, somewhat more balanced, you know, and yeah, we still got to get our balance back. We can tell, oh, we got to get it back, but we're not crashing and burning like in the past. But a lot of us have crashed and burned, have been there. So I want people to, you are such a role model and inspiration to not only women and this strong, divine, feminine energy. We talked about the Lion's portal, and this month it just opened up because we've had so much masculine energy that now we're bringing in this strong feminine energy, which I love because it reminds me of Atlantis. I have a lot of recall from Atlantis. So where all the women were in charge and there were oracles. So I'm like, yay for the feminine energy. So and you know, and we've lived so many lives. You know, we've been male, we've been female. That's why I can, you know, I feel comfortable when I see a guy who's willing to be feminine and male, or a woman that's willing to be masculine or feminine, not just a victim or whatever, that can wear both. We need to learn both. But you are, you know, really an excellent display of that feminine energy, and also overcoming from being trauma to being a victim to being what I call a victor. So I want people listening today to Brooke's story to take note that I know she's gorgeous, she's beautiful in her heart, she's incredible, talented, smart. This is not, you know, this is not where you started. So if you could tell us there, and then we'll get into all the miracles of your life and spiritually transform. I'm just going to let you take the floor and just go for it.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. And yes, my, you know, my incarnation did not begin easily. I, you know, was a young intuitive child. My gifts were in check as soon as I came in here. And yet I was born into a strict Roman Catholic family. And because I barely spoke as a child, because I was always observing, I could always tell and read that what people were saying wasn't in alignment with what they were thinking or feeling. And so I kept to myself a lot. And then the few times that I did disclose information, it wasn't well received because it wasn't things that the family wanted put out there. And so I shut down pretty young. Like, there was developmental trauma with my gifts. And so that was the first of my knowing I wasn't exactly like my family, and that the apple had fallen a little bit far from the tree. At the time, I would have called myself a black sheep. Now I prefer the term rainbow sheep. But
I like unicorn.
my friend says magical rainbow unicorn sheep. So there you go.
It's my spirit animal. Oh my God.
But that said, you know, I ended up really just kind of being in my own world, in my own head, and being in communion with spirit as a young child. But it got me in trouble in Catholic school with the family. And then as I grew older, I unfortunately became ultimately, I became a polytrauma victor, as you described. But at the time, I went from the years of 12 to 17, trigger warning for those of you who are also survivors, I endured sexual abuse the entirety of that time. And unlike the statistics say that only 1% or so actually disclose their abuse, I did actually seek help. And I sought help first within my family, but they didn't believe me and they denied it. And some of them normalized it, like, oh, well, you know, they belittled the extremity of it. And then, oh, well, stuff happens in families was the line that I received.
So this is just for my benefit, because I'm curious, because, you know, I had sexual abuse as a child, which was surrounded around my NDEs because it was trauma. And so did you seek help within the family or outside of the family?
I sought help initially within the family. They noticed that I had always been a straight A student, and so they noticed my grades were slipping and that I wasn't as passionate about certain things like I'd been. I'd always been like a type A go-getter, and all of a sudden I wasn't. And that was a means to get their attention because they weren't noticing what was happening. It wasn't it wasn't my nuclear family wherein the abuse was occurring, but it was, a relational cousin. And
Got it.
so my grades start slipping. They call me out for getting a B because I had never gotten a B before.
Okay.
And I said at that point, well, this is going on. And then it was denied. And to the point that they actually suppressed me even telling them. Like, it took years before they were able to acknowledge that I did say something. Like, actually, it took decades. But that said, I then went to the priest
Okay.
because I was in Catholic school. So I thought if I told them in confession, maybe someone would help me. Yet instead of helping me, I was told to go say some Hail Marys and forgive my abuser, even though it was ongoing. And so at that point, I just started to believe nobody cared and nobody was going to help me. And, dissociation became my primary modality of coping. And when dissociation stopped working, I turned to drugs. And I'm not talking benign drugs. I turned to hardcore drugs.
Right.
So just to shut it all down, just to be, you have to physically be present, but when there's the threat of violence constantly on top of the abuse, you feel that you can't do anything to escape it.
Can I ask you a question real quick? Because this is healing for me too. Because this is not, it's like you're reading out of my book. I mean, it's a similar book. I didn't have the Catholic priest and all that, and I thought about reaching out, but I didn't. I thought they're not going to do it. They're not going to help. Why do you think? Okay, God, a lot of questions here. So my family did the same thing. They didn't want to talk about it. And even as an adult, I think I was 38 and I came out and they just shut me down. I didn't talk to my mom for 7 years.
Wow.
Because I was going to stand in my power. I wasn't mad. It's just like, no, it happened. It totally happened. And so, and I confronted the person that did this on mine. It was a close family member. And I did confront them and I said, this was not okay. And I do remember you said I wouldn't, but I do. But mine went on from 3.5 to 12 and it was brutal. Yeah. And I would hide in the closet. It was terrible. But people don't realize a lot of these near-death experiences it's kind of like a life thing because you're in this world and outside of this world and I pop outside of my body. And I know we talked about that beforehand. Why do you think, families covered up, I guess, because they're ashamed or don't want to admit to it or don't want to have to address it. But why would a stranger or someone like a minister or people not want to admit to this to help? It's still like this a little bit.
I wish I don't have the knowing to say for sure, but I will say this. The priest that I turned to, I later told when I was confirmed, they slap you on the face when you're confirmed. It's supposed to be like a gentle slap on the face. But when the priest put his hands on my face, I said to my mom, he hurts children. And my mom got very upset with me. And it wasn't until I moved 3,000 miles away to escape the abuse that I turned on the TV. And I don't watch the news. I've never watched the news because I've just intuitively never trusted it. Yet that said, I saw the archbishop from where I was from being accused of like 50 counts of pedophilia. And he was the one who touched my face. And he was the one in charge of the church where I disclosed my abuse.
Oh my God. This is wow. Because no wonder he didn't want to say anything because it was his crime. It was his own crime too.
Well, he wasn't the one that I disclosed to, but I have a feeling that they were all very cognizant of it and that they were, and this is before the church. I mean, this is long before the Catholic Church had been called out for what's been going on for a very long time. And so, yes, there was a secrecy and an embedded shame and also a normalization from some that this is like just what happens, So I didn't get it from my family. Unfortunately, they weren't able to hold space or accept the truth. And I don't even think they really heard it back then. It's taken, as I said, 3 decades for them to begin to accept it. And it's really only because of the work I've done to heal and how it's impacting others that they were able to see, like, you know, why would you dedicate your life to something if it's not real? And so that shifted things. The priests were another story. They just didn't even act as if it was something abnormal, to be truthful. And so it was like, and I was very faithful. This is the interesting part, is that I had loved Jesus since I was a little kid. And like, I mean, passionately. I didn't care for the church so much. And I've spoken about this in other interviews. I would get really upset when they would teach us like creation stories and blame it on the snake and Eve. I'm like, what about the dude? What about the man? Like, where is he in all of this? Like that, I automatically had an issue with the patriarchy. And yet Jesus himself, I felt this immense heart connection to. And so it was very crippling to me on a spiritual level when the priest actually, you know, completely ignored what I had to disclose, because then I just rejected the church. And from that moment on, anything associated with the church, I demonized. So I became what I called a recovering Catholic, you know, at 16. And things only progressively got worse. My drug addiction, it was not benign. I mean, I was not someone who just picked up pot. I went straight for cocaine and heroin. And I ended up overdosing at 16. And that was really my first NDE, but it wasn't as huge as the one that I've spoke about over and over. But there was, when they were pumping the charcoal into me to get the drugs out, there was a moment when I thought I was leaving. And then I had the energy of Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene at the same time come in and hold me. And they said, not now, we have you. You're going to be okay. And then I just collapsed into a void and woke up a few days later. And, you know, so they were there and they were archetypal energies. And I didn't know that term or understand that then. But as the abuse continued, I became very suicidal. And mostly because, again, there was no escaping it. My family did what they thought was the highest and best at the time. So they were out building a business, which meant they were traveling all the time, which made me open to this continually going on.
How long did it go on, Brooke?
I believe I was 11 or 12, and it didn't stop until I left at 18.
Jeez. I know a lady that I went to college with, and the same thing, and it was her dad. It was, and it all the way up to there. Some people were fleeing. You know, the dormitory with all the girls is similar. So you're right. I felt like I was in prison.
Yeah, it was horrible. And then because you've been victimized, you get to a point where you blame yourself because nobody's validated your experience. So it becomes, I'm bad, I'm dirty, all these things are happening because of me, you know, becomes the schema in the child's mind. And what ends up happening is that these other people, these other predators can energetically pick up on that. And so I had more assaults, rape, things of that nature occur outside of the family dyad. And when that happened, and one of the most brutal acts, I came home and there's nobody there because, again, they were traveling for work. And I knew where my dad kept his gun. I've never spoke about this before publicly, but I'm going to speak with it to you because I feel comfortable and we have this shared, you know, history.
I've been through the poop too. I mean, look, I send you so much love. Whatever you want to say, you're supported. I'd send you my love.
Thank you, darling. And so I went into my family's home, and my dad had always shown me like where the gun was, how to use it, how to protect yourself. I wanted nothing to do with it. I've always had a natural like disdain for guns, even though I grew up around them because I grew up on a farm and they were everywhere, you know. That said, my dad himself only kept one for protection. Well, they weren't home. And after a brutal assault, I came in the house and I picked up that gun and I was determined to just end it because at this point it had just been so many years and nobody was helping me. And I was being called the worst names because of my drug addiction. But no one was understanding that all I was trying to do was not feel the immense pain that I
Right.
was constantly going through and being violated over and over and over, and having no sense of sovereignty or that my body was my own. And I picked up the gun, and I remember just playing, like holding it, like kind of caressing it, and then wanting to use it. And and I encountered once again Mother Mary's energy, and she came into the room, and she was like, all of what's happening. And again, this was just like in an NDE. It wasn't said to me. I didn't hear her. I intuitively had like a telepathic inner,
Telepathically. Yeah.
and she enveloped me in this like blanket of love and let me know that everything that had occurred was part of why I was here, and there was no reason to leave, and that I was going to be held through all of this. I just needed to stay. And as I received that message, a Yellow Pages phone book fell onto my lap, and I kid you not, because you'll understand this, but to those that are skeptics, it'll sound far-fetched, but I kid you not, it opened on my lap to the suicide hotline.
No, that's some God Jesus stuff going on right there.
I know,
It
I know.
is. Oh, that's awesome. Oh
And
my gosh.
And I called them and I talked to them. And then again, this is years before I have any idea I'm going into the healing professions, right? And I called them and I cried my heart out and I told them everything. And they gave me resources. And, you know, it was crazy because like right after I got off the phone with them, my parents walked into the door. So it was like I'd already put the gun away. I've had this conversation. They have no idea any of this has occurred. And being such at this point, having endured so much abuse, I was able to come down to the front door and act like nothing had happened, you know, because I'm so dissociated from my emotional
I
state.
get it.
And that's what's hard for people to understand now, because they see these videos and they see like when I talk about the NDE or even being a polytrauma survivor, and I can smile through it. But, you know, I smile because I've overcome it. When I actually go into the nitty gritty, no, none of it was beautiful. None of it was pretty. But I do know that it was something my soul came through to come here and serve with. You know,
Yeah.
I had to learn, I learned through it. And in my personal ideology, I chose to come to learn through it. Now, was that the easiest route? No. But why did I do it? Because I could. And because so many women are going through this and have been going through it for eons and have had no voice. So if we can give it a voice by overcoming it and transmuting it, then that's exactly why we are able to endure it and move forward.
Oh my God, you're such a blessing to me. I tell you, your strength, just you, I mean, this is just really amazing because I have gone through this. I know someone else, a near-death experiencer. She's grown too, and she's been really nervous to tell her story, and because of the same thing, and really, really hardship and trauma, and it was two close family members that wouldn't back off. So people don't realize the dirty. There's some, you know, the things that go on behind closed doors, whether it's with families or relationships or marriages. You can't imagine some of the things that people have tolerated, and it's to come out from underneath it. When we talk about detoxing and getting rid of negative people, and detoxing and getting rid of things that don't serve you, and renewing and refreshing, we don't realize that with people, what they've been through, how hard it is for some to actually do that. So,
Definitely. Yeah.
So this is so helpful for so many. And of course, at the end, when we're done, I also want to follow up and leave some resource information for women, not just women, men too. This can happen to anybody, absolutely anyone. I had a guy friend in college, and he was, I mean, not that it matters, but he was straight, but he was raped by his scout leader. And he was like, he didn't know what to do, because he was grown. He was sort of grown. So yeah, this happens a lot. We'll leave some information below, and of course, how to get in touch with you. So this conversation continue on. So go on. So you were on the drugs, and I totally get that. You were trying to shut it out. And then, so what happened from here before your NDE?
Well, I was really bad off on the drugs to the point that I honestly, spirit say I'm literally probably on my last life if I was a cat, because spirit came to my aid so many times. I was so thin that my friends would joke like if you pushed me, I would just like dissolve because I was just so tiny. And I was playing soccer, and I was very good at soccer, but I was playing soccer and I had a wonderful coach who had actually been my referee when I was younger. And he basically said to me, you know, you have a choice. You can keep going down this road and it's obvious where it ends. He's like, but I can't allow you to play if you're going to continue to do what
Wow.
you're doing because you're a pencil, you know. And he's like, all it takes is you running out there and having a heart attack. And we did go to a private school that was well known for sports, and we'd actually lost some athletes to drugs, so it wasn't like unknown that this could happen. However, I was a female and it would have been the first in the, you know, female circle for that to happen. And at the time I thought he was being like, you know, rude or whatever. And now of course I know it was care and concern.
Mm.
But at the time I was so sick, I chose the drugs over soccer and all the things soccer could have brought me, scholarships, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I ended up in rehab the second time, I realized then I overdosed in rehab. I like literally used my my smarts to figure out how to get into the nurse's station. And mind you, it's a rehab. They have it pretty well secure, right? But I was so good at like the just all the things that come with addiction, which is the lying and you know, all of that, the playing roles, that I tricked them and I got into the nurse's station one night and I stole medication and I misread it because I was trying to be quick. And I thought I'd taken Klonopin, but I had taken clonidine. Well, clonidine is for the heart and it actually slows down your blood pressure. Well, I just took a handful of it and thinking I was taking Klonopin.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And yeah, I overdosed and ended up coming to in the hospital with very naturally and rightfully angry parents. And when I came to, that was when it was like, it hit me like, what are you doing? Like you have, like, you've already overdosed before. You are here now. You have this opportunity to heal and you're making it worse, you know? And again, there was a lot of shame and blame involved in that kind of thinking because, again, I was holding myself accountable for the abuse.
Mhm.
But it was also an aha moment when then I realized I need help.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up apologizing to everyone at the rehab and asking if I could stay. They kicked everyone else out because this is just so y'all know that I'm no like, you know, saint. I gave out some of the drugs that I had stolen to other people.
Oh my, you are so thoughtful.
Oh yeah, so thoughtful.
Oh my
And
God.
it
Oh
didn't
my
work
God.
out
Wait,
well.
let me picture this. So you got everybody like kind of jacked.
Oh, I took the whole bottle.
Oh
And
my
it's
God.
like,
So you
it's like
handed out,
this
they're all like,
ginormous bottle.
so they're like high or what?
Well,
Or they-
a couple people ended up in the hospital with me. They didn't end up as sick because they didn't take
Oh
handfuls.
my God. So you also did, it's not just you, a big debacle here.
Yeah,
Oh,
there were
big
3 of us
thing.
that ended up in the hospital, and 3
Oh
is
my
significant
gosh.
for me in so many ways. But yet they ended up in the hospital. They were not nearly as sick as I was, but that feeling that responsibility of that they would have not been there had I not gone and stole those drugs. That's when it started to be like, okay, not only are you taking yourself down, you have the potential to take other people with you. And that weight was too much for, even though my soul had fragmented at this point from all the abuse, what was still embodied couldn't handle that. And so I went back and I asked for forgiveness and amends, and I spoke to the whole community and they welcomed me back. And interestingly, they welcomed me back and not any of the other people. But I was the one that went and really asked, you know, I said, I'm like, I really messed up. Will you allow me back? And they did. And I finished the program. I wish I could say I stayed sober after that, but I did not. I
Mhm.
stayed sober for a period of time. And then, the abuse continued and I ended up just binging. And very interesting story as far as how earth angels can manifest. It was the person that I was actually getting my cocaine from who looked at me one day and was like, I'm not going to let anyone in the city sell to you again because you're running from something and you have so much potential and I'm not going to help you kill yourself.
Oh,
And I beat him on his chest. And this is like a guy that's like 6'6", right? And I'm just like this little tiny, like 99-pound person. And I was so angry at him. He's like, you have the opportunity. You have a scholarship to school. You're moving in a few weeks. Don't kill yourself, prior. And I was a mess and I was so sad, but then I left. I had consciously chosen a school as far away as possible as I could be from the East Coast. And when I was sober and I had detoxed, I made a vow to myself that I would never touch those substances. And this is how powerful we are. Even after, I guess I started abusing the drugs around 14, the hardcore drugs. And even though I'd been doing those for 4 years, every single day, minus those brief periods of sobriety, I came to California and I never touched cocaine or heroin again. It was just like, boom, done.
so cold turkey. When you decided, you're like, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
You're right. When people can really make a decision, but it has to be, people say rock bottom or whatever, but it just has to be at a point that you're fed up with whatever and ready for change.
Yeah, and I still struggled. I mean, I was a young person, so I was in college and then graduate school, and people were drinking and doing other, party drugs. I still dibbled and dabbled there, but it was never like what had happened before.
Right. Well, you saw how deep it went, and maybe it might have been scary. You thought this time you can't get out. So tell us about your big NDE. And I wanted, because you have a lot of spiritually transformative experiences too. I mean, this is what I'm saying. There is so much to you, even just on the going from victim to victor is amazing. And there's so many nuggets, just that we could just spend like 2 hours just on that. So tell us from the NDE and about the the spiritual experiences that you've had as well, because I want to hear about how you saw your kids and some of these things too.
Okay, well, when trauma, and we understand this now, but yet when I was in school for my degrees, there was a really different understanding of trauma. So they really thought PTSD was really related to war and combat and things of that nature. We've since, although the DSM has not defined complex post-traumatic stress as an actual nomenclature diagnosis yet in the 5th edition, it is highly likely in the 6th edition they will utilize it, because we have noticed through observation and survivors coming forward and telling their story that there is a big difference between trauma that goes on for a very long time versus trauma that is short term. And so my central nervous system was in fight, flight, freeze, or appease for so very long. And then I go and get an art degree, because art was that was my drug of choice when I was sober, was art, because I could express the pain.
Me too. That's what got me through it, was art and drawing.
Yep. It was a way to express the pain without having to say it and relive it like all the therapists wanted me to do. And again, therapy wasn't where it's at now. Now there are techniques for trauma survivors wherein you don't have to tell the story over and over and over, which is huge progress. But that said, that wasn't the case back then. And so art became extremely healing for me. I go to art school because it's the only thing that makes sense, and it gets me to California, which is the entire other side of the country from where I grew up. And when I'm in art school, everything's pretty benign, but I realize that art for sale doesn't really work for me. Like, it's part of me and I don't want to give it away. And so I graduate top of my class, yet I don't enjoy any of the work. It's like not fulfilling whatsoever if I have to listen to an art director and make what they want and not do stuff that's called from my soul and spirit. And so I started volunteering with an organization called Free Arts for Abused Children. And the whole purpose of the organization was these kids that had been through horrific situations, which resonated with me, even though I didn't consciously seek it out, it resonated. And basically you would sit with them while they were outside the courtroom or while their parents were, you know, in prison or whatever. And you would meet with them multiple times a week and you would just make art. And quite often we never spoke, but the art would just be this exchange between us. And I realized when I was doing that, like there's something here that speaks to my soul, and I can utilize art, but I can also make it healing. And it just so happened to be that the predominant art therapy program in the United States was just down the street from my house.
Oh my gosh.
And so on a whim, I applied, and I was the only person without a psychology background that got into this dual program because it was focused on marital and family therapy and clinical art therapy. And that was so that you could be a licensed clinician and an art therapist, because often you have to go get 2 separate degrees if you want to do that. And so I went in really just wanting to do the art, and then I fell in love with psychology. And I was the underdog without that degree. And then I ended up graduating top of my class for psychology. And I just fell in love with, you know, Jungian psychology and the archetypes and the depths. And, you know, it all made some of the shadow. It all made so much sense to the trauma I had endured. And I disclosed during my, you know, some sort of talk I was giving for the class, my history. And my dean at the time, though very well intended, kind of pushed me to go away from the thesis I wanted to create, which was on a totally different topic, to focus on what I'd been through and how to utilize that clinically for the benefit of others. And I was very resistant. Like there was a soul knowing and inner knowing that this was opening a door, like a very big door. And at the time I called it Pandora's box. I now realize it's Pandora's gift, but it took me years to have that transmutation process occur, because the actual title of the paper was The Wounded Healer, a heuristic exploration of re-traumatization anxiety. So I knew I was carrying these wounds. I knew they were putting me with trauma survivors, and I knew I was terrified of becoming re-traumatized. I also knew it was happening to other healers, and they weren't talking about it.
Wow, this is heavy stuff, because a lot of healers, in order for them to understand people going through something, have been through it too. And there's layers of an onion. It's still there. Sometimes I think, oh, mine is, I'm good, I'm better than where I was. But you think, oh, and then there's more. You're like, what do you think about that? Layers of onion of abuse? It's just buried.
Yeah, well, I mean, you always have scar tissue from it. So it's like you end up, you heal one thing, and then, you know, another layer of a wound comes up. And so you always have to be cognizant that as a wounded healer, which in my opinion, all the people attracted to the healing profession, for one reason or another, there is a spectrum as far as, you know, how vast it may be or how deep the wounds go. But on some level, they're all wounded healers. They're called to it for their own healing. The issue is, do you take accountability that you are healing, or do you project your wounds onto somebody else? And my experience as being a patient was that I was often having other people's wounds projected on me. So when they put me with trauma survivors and people that were going through it as well, I made a vow to myself, I will not project what I've been through, you know, onto them. I'm going to take accountability. I know what I am, you know, therefore I'm going to explore it as far as I can. And to this day, I still am, so that it's not something I project onto other people. But what I did not understand, and I did not have the vernacular for at the time, was that I was an empath and an intuitive and a highly sensitive person. And so when I would go in the room and do these trauma, and I was working in a milieu where I was the primary therapist, and these kids were, there was a classroom of only 12 with severe psychopathology. And I was the primary therapist, and I had a view of them at all times, and I saw them them individually 3 times a week. I saw their families, and I saw them in group. So I knew them very intimately. I dealt with their trauma very intimately. However, what I didn't get was, because of my empathy, because of being an empath and not knowing that I was energetically so sensitive, they were teaching us clinical boundaries. I understood clinical boundaries. I followed those. Except the problem is I didn't understand energetic boundaries. And so I was I was basically transmuting their trauma for them by taking it in and compounding my own. Well, what ended up happening? The body got sick. The body, like, as they say, as the famous book on trauma now says, the body keeps score, or when the body says no. And so my body literally just could not take anymore. It was like, enough's enough, with the abuse, the inflammatory thoughts coming from the self, and, then just taking on other people's stuff. And so I started inflaming really bad, swelling up, having locked joints, having severe asthma. And then that gradually escalated. And there were ebbs and flows. There was a period I was so sick, I was hospitalized writing the paper that I've mentioned, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to finish. And then I took a complete break. They let me come back, graduate top of the class, everything's a-okay. It's when I'm getting licensed that this period of where you have to work for 2 years to get your license in these really intense environments, I end up getting really sick. And at the time, I knew there was something about the work that was affecting me. I didn't understand it was that I was basically sucking up all their pain and adding it to my own.
Oh, empathics do that. They'll take on they can even take on medical illnesses. Yeah.
Yes. And I had no
boy.
idea. And then I go into my PhD, where I dive deeper into my inquiry into the wounded healer and my fascination with like more archetypal psychology. But as I'm doing this, and I mean, I went all the way, I was all the way in my candidacy, but I'm getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And finally, I've been diagnosed with multiple autoimmune conditions. My family thinks that I'm, again, making this up because no doctor gives me the same diagnosis. And all they would do is blame the tests. They would say, well, the tests sometimes are confusing and some autoimmune diseases look the same and yada, yada, yada. Intuitively, I knew something was a little off about all of this. And I am from Maryland, so I contact Johns Hopkins because they're the leading autoimmune research center in the world, at the time at least. And so they probably still are, but I just know they were back then. And that said, I end up getting in because my case history is complex. At this point, it's already over 7 years and nobody's given me a right diagnosis. And at this point, they're telling me my lungs are failing, my kidneys are now compromised, I need to go on dialysis. And so I'm just eager to get into Hopkins. Well, as I'm eager to get into Hopkins, the appointment was given to me like almost like a lottery. Someone canceled, I got it. So I fly back in an instant. My family happens to be on a cruise. They're not there. And I have the worst flare up of my life. Everything's blocking. Everything's purple and black. I can't move. I was on so many different medications. I call the doctors. I tell my doctors in Los Angeles, I tell them how severe it is. What do? I don't see Hopkins for a day or two. And they told me to take all the medication exactly as directed. I would be okay. This is before the opiate crisis, okay? And so I have a combination of, pain medication that's rather benign, Tylenol, and then I have actual opiate medications, and then I have all this other stuff for the lungs and whatever. Ironically, it was not the opiates that did me in. It was the Tylenol. The Tylenol.
Really?
The Tylenol happened to be in multiple products, but the Tylenol might have not done it had the doctors caught my liver was already compromised. So when I took the medication the way the doctors told me, you'll be okay for a day or two, my liver went into complete liver failure. And when it did, it took the kidneys and the lungs with it. So my NDE begins after I was helicoptered to Johns Hopkins. I'm in ICU and I start to go out of the body. And like so many other intuitives, including yourself, I've astral projected and had lucid dreams since I was a child. And so I'm noticing that I'm like floating around and there's this X-Files like scene. And I'm just like, okay, wake up, time to wake up, like attempting to get myself out of the scenario. And then all of a sudden it's like, magnet pulls me up and it's like, this isn't a dream. And next thing I know, I'm in the most beautiful, ineffable space. And I see these three lights that I have known since childhood. And if I had a body, I probably would have been sobbing. Yet I was just this orb of consciousness and light.
Mhm.
And yet I knew them, and I was so enveloped in the way they held me, because as a polytrauma survivor and someone whose own family denied the abuse, I never felt held. I never felt validated. I never felt unconditional love. And
Yes.
suddenly there were these three beings who not only held me like that, but I knew them. Like I recognized them. It was a homecoming. And they held me, and I honestly, I was comatose for 3.5 days. I didn't even notice the source light initially because I was so just in a state of awe and bliss and ecstasy in being held and loved.
Yeah.
And then, and they were communicating to me through telepathy and inner knowing, which again was validating to the consciousness that was me in this space, because that's how I'd been as a child. And suddenly I was in a space where it was okay. And that's how everyone communicated, through light, through telepathy, through inner knowing, through intuition. There was no need for words. And it was like all of those experiences I'd been through as a young child, where I'd felt alien and outcast. Suddenly I was amongst the stars and I was home.
Yeah, I get that.
And, that I was with them and they communicated so many different things to me. And that's then at some point, and there's no time like here. So 3 days felt like years. When I woke up, I was convinced I had been comatose for like years and years.
It's weird because I was in a coma 3 days when I died of pneumonia. I was dead on arrival. Why 3? Isn't that weird? There's somebody else that's 3 too. I thought that was unusual.
I think the 3 is quite significant because it comes
Yeah,
up a
well,
lot.
I'm really into numerology. So I just thought I'd mention that. The 3, because I've heard someone else and it was 3. It was Dr. Lawrence Brock. His was 3 days too.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of persons that it was.
3.
So
3
it
days
seems
in a coma. What? 3 days is the magic number, I guess, to get a download.
so yeah, so I was in that space 3 days, and I did eventually, let myself receive all the information that they were giving me. And then I was gravitating towards that magnetic source light. And of course, it's so beautiful and enchanting and welcoming that that's where you want to go. And yet, as much as I was being pulled towards it, there was some other aspect of my consciousness or my light, because that's all I really was. I was an orb of light, just like the angelics had like a very high vibration, and then source had, of course, a much higher vibration. And then there were actual voids of blackness, but then there were stars. So it was like everything had a light signature and an energy signature, and it all felt welcoming. And so I just wanted to go be one with that beautiful source light. And my angelics let me know, you're welcome to do that. That's, you're part of that. That's where you came from. Yet at the same time, again, without words, it's very hard to put this in human language, but without words, they let me know, you can go back because there's a mission that you came here for. And if you choose to go into that light, which is perfectly okay, you're going to come back again and you're going to repeat a lot of things, and in order to do this mission. Or you can go back now and finish it. And they let me know, again, in the much more gentle language than I have the human proficiency to articulate to you. But they let me know that when I came back, it was not going to be easy. And yet they also let me know, look at what you've already overcome. Look at what you've done with it. Look at where you are. And none of that compares to where you'll end up if you choose to go back. And they also supported me so lovingly by letting me know it was going to be a period. And I didn't understand this at the time. It only made sense to me at the 10-year anniversary of my coma. But they communicate with the light beams or the inner knowing. And they let me know it was going to be a period of years. And they literally, like, the light flashed 10 times.
Wow.
And I remember, like, holding on to that, like, what's the 10 mean? Right. And what they told me was that after a period of years, that I would be stepping onto a platform with a group that had all come here to assist each other.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't be alone. And my trauma wouldn't be a disservice. It would be an act of service. And so something about that, my oversoul, like, completely understood and was like, yep, let's go back. But then, go ahead.
Okay, I just got to say this. This is really unusual because we've never talked before, right? No, never. I mean, I think you're great. I mean, I could pick that right up, but we haven't. I was told something similar. I argued about coming back. I wanted to stay. With me, it was Jesus, and I was held so wonderfully and walked with him. I've never felt such love. Immense love, a supernatural love. Let's just put it that way.
Definitely.
And no judgment or anything at all. And I didn't want to come back, but they said that I had this mission. I needed to come back. And they said that it's going to be a little bit longer, but they're sending me someone, which I know now was my husband later on, because he's the only sane person that's been around me and supportive. He's like my Saint Michael. But the thing is, they said, you've got to come back. And they said, there will be others doing this. And one day you will reunite together and do this in sequence together. It kind of like it's a big to do all at one time. And he says, so you'll have to wait. He says, because the effects of it are more multiplied in waves. He says, but everything counts, even the small things till then, but you're not the only things. So I said, I'm going to be doing it separately. He said, for a while. And he said, but then people would come together. And that's what they're doing now, because I think people are I'm choosing love. I don't want war. I don't want tyranny. I don't want whatever, if I sound like a hippie, I want love. I want to care for one another. And I want us to live in freedom and in love. And so here we are. Isn't that odd that we were told almost the same thing?
I don't find it odd, because I think that's exactly why we're having this conversation. Like, we were brought back to unify with our teams, our soul.
Yeah, we already said we're on the same team.
Yeah. So and so no, it makes sense to me, because I mean, even when you get back to the number thing, when I came back here, because so I do want to mention the children, since you asked about that. So as I was feeling the call back to the body, I noticed that there were these two lights that were very different from the angelics and source and the cosmic lights that were going on. And I was like, it was like I was betrothed to these lights. They were so beautiful, but they did not have the vibration of the angelics or source. And yet they were this gorgeous indigo and this gorgeous, like the most pure green you've ever seen, like emerald. And I was just enchanted by them. But unlike the other, the angelics or source, I wasn't getting any information from them. And unlike the angelics and source, they weren't holding me. In fact, I felt this like propensity and longing to hold them. And yet I had no idea what any of that meant, because I was just this orb of light and consciousness, and a 29-year-old person that didn't have any idea that they wanted to have a family or kids. And so when I eventually make the choice to return to the body, I ask them, how do I get back? And they say, follow a light unlike any of the others. And by any of the others, they meant the angelic, source, and these other interesting lights. And so I end up, my orbs shifted very, very rapidly, and I'm catapulted back into the body as I follow this blinding artificial light. And to this day, I'm still super sensitive to artificial light.
Mhm.
It turned out to be the flashlight they were using to check my vitals. And that's what I anchored back into the body.
Yeah.
With.
That is so funny. And I'm super sensitive to light too. As a little kid, I'd wear sunglasses all the time. And later on, they said, "Oh, well, you have darker eyes. They're really dark. They're like amber, like a wolf's." I said, "No, but same thing. Sensitive sunlight." Because some of these are similar to NDErs. NDErs
Yeah.
are traits.
Yes. Yeah. And I do. I wear sunglasses all the time because of my gifts, that they just help minimize sometimes the effects. But I was catapulted back into the body. And as soon as I came into the body, I have no idea how I got into a coma. I have no idea I woke up from a coma, I just think I woke up. And then I realized I'm strapped down to a bed. Like, they literally had me strapped down because I'd been declared probably most likely brain dead with a 1% chance of survival.
Wow.
And so they put a PICC line going into the brain trying to save cognitive functioning, because they had prepared my husband at the time and my parents for the fact that I would be in a vegetative state if I did return.
Okay.
And the chances of my returning were so slim that they were already preparing last rites and all of that. My liver count was over 200,000. You're supposed to die at 100,000. Okay. So I was somehow holding on in this comatose state, and nobody could explain it, but they didn't expect the brain to be there. So when I woke up and I'm literally strapped down and intubated, I can't communicate with anyone. And nobody notices I wake up. And you've been comatose, you have involuntary muscle spasms and things of that nature. So I was doing my best to move the left arm, which was all I could move. And they weren't noticing because they thought it was a muscle spasm. So after a while in that state, where I've come from like the most beautiful experience of my life, this divine, transformative, transcendent experience. And suddenly I'm back in this human body, which literally feels like hell, strapped down to a bed, and nobody notices I'm there. And I basically induced a panic attack so that they would see my vitals go up. And because I noticed nobody was paying any attention to me no matter what I did. And sure enough, when they noticed the vitals, a nurse came over and she noticed me rapidly moving my left eye because it was all I could really control. And she said to me, if you can understand me, show me yes, blink like once or twice. I don't remember which was one or two, and then if no, this. And I blinked and we communicated, and they realized I was cognitively there. Yet I had to be intubated for many days because my lungs were still too weak. So, my after effects are fully on at this point, and it might have been a great blessing I couldn't communicate, to be honest, because I don't know what I would have said.
You needed some downtime to kind of process all this. So your lungs shut down. Did you ever get pneumonia? Or were you
I had pneumonia. I had what they call chronic pneumonia for years. So I would have bouts of chronic bronchitis and chronic pneumonia that would last months. And I was on very high dose steroids. And honestly, I do feel those contributed to the disease because they're immunosuppressants. And when you leave someone on those a long time, what's going to happen? The immune system gets compromised, right? So I was on high dose prednisone for many, many, many years. That said, I did not have pneumonia or bronchitis when I went into the hospital. It was lung failure just from the amount of time that my lungs had been, in distress. And so I'm intubated, and I noticed that I don't have my contacts in, and I don't have my glasses on, and I have very poor vision without either of those. And I'm noticing that everything is moving, and there's colors around everything, and there's patterns on everything. And it doesn't matter if it's a human or like an electronical device or the bed sheet, but everything has this field that's moving. And I'm like, they gave me some good drugs, because it's kind of like being on psychedelics, right? And so I'm like, I guess they gave me something really good.
You
And
were
after
seeing the energy of everything.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And then the
that's cool.
doctor comes in, and one of them, they're real grim and they're not nice to me because they were not my main medical team. This is Hopkins I'm at. They've never seen me. I just show up before my appointment because of what's occurred. And so they made a lot of assumptions. And based on the Tylenol, they had assumed it was a suicide attempt. And because
Whoa.
Exactly. And then because of my history, my family fed into that. Well, she was a drug addict and she dealt with depression and yada, yada. And so I notice immediately everyone's got like this funky, like they're acting all happy. I'm awake, yet they've got this funky vibration, and what they're saying doesn't align with what they are like emanating. And then I have doctors and nurses treating me poorly. I mean, I had a nurse straight up tell me, people that try to take their lives, it's like, it's not fair that you survived when you didn't care about your own life. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I can't speak, mind you. She's saying this to a person that's intubated. And I'm like, they think I tried to kill myself. Like, what are they talking about? Like,
oh my gosh.
but I also have no recollection of how I got there.
Oh my God, you're kidding. I was just going to say real quick, that actually has come up with medium readings, that people that have crossed over, it's an accident, that they really didn't mean to take their life. So people get really, really weird about that. So wait a minute, let's go back. So you didn't know where did you think you were? You didn't know where you were?
I knew I was in a hospital. Or you mean in the NDE or the hospital?
well, I guess both.
Well, when I first woke up, I wanted to convince myself that I had like this really wild lucid dream that I couldn't pull myself out of, or like the drugs had caused it. But then all of a sudden I'm seeing all this stuff. And then again, oh, well, they must have given me drugs. Well, once I figure out, first off, they give me a suicidal assessment after they finally take the intubator out, and I pass with flying colors. And the shrink is immediately like, she's not suicidal, and I mean, I knew the test. I did have an advantage. If I'm honest, I was a PhD candidate. I knew exactly what they were going to assess me for.
Yeah, exactly.
So I made sure I gave the perfect answers. Yet that said, I wanted them to see I was not suicidal.
Right.
And so that she immediately, and another doctor came in and did the same thing. And they're like, no, she's not suicidal. Like, this was an accident. And we don't know how. Like, she doesn't remember. All I told them was I took the medication the way I was told to take the medication. I don't remember anything after that. Did I take more? Possibly. I was in excruciating pain. But was it to kill myself? No. And so when I start being able to talk and get information, which was very gradual, because when an intubator has been in for a long time, you can't speak. You just can't.
Your throat's raw.
Yeah, so I was writing things down with my left hand because it was the only one I could move, because they still had the PICC line in my head, because everyone was still afraid that if they removed that with the amount of organ damage I had, that was it. And so they're frantically searching for a new liver. I have a doctor come in and tell me, if I don't get a new liver immediately, I'm dead. And what's fascinating is I remember him saying that, but what I remember more was noticing his lungs were black. And as he told me that I was going to die, he was like, I really need a cigarette, in his head. And I was like,
so you did a body scan without knowing you were doing it.
I had no idea. And I was like, I just heard his thoughts. Like, I was just like, this guy is telling me I'm going to die, and he's got black lungs and fantasizing about a cigarette.
That is funny.
Yeah. So then there was this, just like the oversoul or the higher self came in and was like, don't listen to them. That was like a mantra that just came on automatically. Do not listen to them. Do not listen to them. Ignore them. And then I started noticing, and then I was told they didn't give me any drugs. They couldn't give me drugs. My liver had failed. So I was given absolutely nothing. So then I started to realize what I'm seeing is
It's
something
you.
that's happening to me, is part of me, and
Yep.
something I brought back. Oh, you know, enter a curse word I won't say on, but I'm like, holy, whatever. This is something's happening to me,
Right.
and it's very real. And that's when I noticed, like, not the energy that I was able to see on everything was most potent coming out of my hands. And so very gradually at night, I started working with it by calling on the angelics, just, intuitively knowing I needed
Yeah.
help. And they would come in and they would just assist me with, like, putting the hands of light on the organs that had been so tremendously damaged. And I had been told I was going to be in the hospital for, possibly a year, rehabilitation, waiting
Oh
for the
my gosh.
transplant, learning how to walk and all that again, because when the liver fails, all the bile comes out. And so I had swollen up. It looked like I put 20 or 30 pounds on overnight. And I'm completely black and blue and jaundiced. And this is like when I come to.
Oh.
So I can only imagine what I looked like prior. So they weren't allowing me to move or do anything because I was just so swollen and inflamed. And I was like, there's no way in
Wow.
that I'm staying here. I'm getting out of this hospital. It was Christmas time. They were playing Christmas music, which was excruciating. All they
You're
did was
like,
play
yeah,
Christmas
you felt
music.
joyful, all right.
Yes.
Christmas
And all
torture,
these,
you couldn't
all these,
leave. It's gonna be a horror movie.
they played Christmas music and Christmas movies, and that was it. Or Law and Order, and then that was it.
Oh
And so
my God. That's
I was like,
torture in itself.
I can't get better in this place. Get me out of here. But every day, like, a new gift would unfold. Like, the walls of ICU were all glass. And so they would call code red or code blue. And if a soul was meant to transition and chose to actually go into the light, I would see the pillar of light, and I would see their beloveds in the light, or their guides of the light come, and I'd be sitting there like this, watching through the window as someone, went to the other side. And the whole time I'm giving myself mental status exams. I'm like, am I oriented ×4? Am I losing my crap? Like, what's happening? And then I realized, no, I'm completely rational, yet I have something that has turned on that's not going off. In fact, it's just getting louder and louder.
So this is a lot better than Christmas movies, and it's like it's a better life for real. What with Jimmy Stewart? It's like the for real version. So, so now you carried these gifts with you as you move forward in life, or if they've enhanced, if they developed, if they, what happened with the gifts? Because a lot of people come back from near-death experiences with gifts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they enhanced, and at first it was fun because it allowed me to heal. I ended up getting out of the hospital. Everybody called it a miracle. That no one could understand how I healed. I was declared spontaneous remission. I was still told I had a 1% chance without a new liver, but my liver function went from near death, literally, like beyond death, according to medical science, to actual optimal range by the time I was discharged in under 3.5 weeks. I got out a
Wow,
few
not a
days.
year, 3 weeks. We're
Yeah.
back to 3. We're back to 3 again.
Yep, we are
That
back to
number
3
is the
again.
Jesus number. Let's just admit it. It's the Jesus number. He's really
Yep,
good
it is
about
the Trinity. It's really
It's
the
the
Trinity.
It's the
And
Trinity.
yes,
The
and
Father, Son,
so
Holy Spirit. Yeah.
yeah, and so I end up getting discharged. I for a while I'm very passionate about, like, playing with the gifts. I'm still, like, clinically oriented, so I'm trying to find all the research I can to understand it. So I start reading about, like, any MD's version of vibrational medicine or the quantum field, quantum physics, any scientific explanation I can get, I devour. And yet I try to go back and finish my candidacy. And every time I go back, I went back 3 times. Every time I go back, I get sick. And I ended up
3 times.
understanding intuitively that if I were to stay on that path, I was going to go back to where I had come from. I was going to die. I was going to be sick again. There was something about that path that wasn't where I was supposed to be. And that was very soul crushing. I went through an ego death and dark night of the soul because I had worked for 13 and a half years to get all of these academic accolades. And suddenly I am walking away from them. And my family can't understand it because I'm in this rigorous, like,
Oh.
beloved school that people work their whole lives to get into. And then suddenly I'm walking away from it.
Were you
And
told to do that, or you just felt intuitively, I've got to do something else?
my body told me. Oh, well, I knew intuitively that I was not aligned with my dissertation anymore. And so I kept
Got it.
asking my school if I could like add in this consciousness near death aspect to like the wounded healer thing. And they were not having it. If it were here and now, they'd probably be all about it because that research is, going well.
Popular.
But at the time, nobody was into it. And I was top seated in my class and they were really excited about what I was doing with my dissertation. And so they were like, they basically use scare tactics. If you want to change it, you need to rewrite the whole thing. Therefore, it's going to take 3.5 more years. Why would you do that? Just defend it as it is and then go out in the world and be a doctor. And yet there was some part of me on a soul level that was like, I am not aligned to this. I don't want to put my name on this. If I put this out as my first thing, it's the foundation of everything I build. I don't believe in this foundation.
Right.
And I was already starting to believe that I didn't believe in clinical psychology like I used to. Because if I did, then I would have disclosed what I was experiencing to a clinician. Yet I knew if I disclosed, they would either label me psychotic or schizoaffective at best. And so I kept it to myself. I did not go to therapists. I was attempting to learn how to ground the gifts on my own. It didn't go so well because I didn't have a manual or any guide. And then eventually I leave psychology, and it happened to be my first IANS conference in 2012, ironically.
Oh my gosh.
And the whole conference was actually a nightmare for me because I was so ungrounded and I didn't understand that when persons like us get together, we amplify each other's gifts.
Oh my God. Yeah, but it's sort of like a love fest too, isn't it?
It is, but if you're ungrounded in it, and I also didn't know I was carrying my firstborn at this time, and he's intuitive and also has all the gifts. So I'm in this space and my gifts are just like fireworks. And I'm having kind of a miserable time because I can't ground it. Yet I ended up, for some reason, staying at the conference. And I now understand why. And it was because they spoke at the very end. They had Mayan and Tibetan elders come out and speak about how the 2012 prophecies had been misunderstood. And what they really were an end of a certain period of time. Mm-hmm. And hold on one second, I need to plug in my battery. And so they were explaining how we were going to shift in consciousness. We had this opportunity. But what was important for me was that when the shamans were speaking, suddenly I felt grounded. And so there was like, there's something to this. There's something, and I also happen to be married to a Native American man. And I'm like, there's all of these like a fully Yaqui, and I was carrying a half indigenous child at this point from an indigenous lineage. So I resonated with the shamanism. And so I just started seeking out shamans. 3 again of all different traditions, some of Native American, Taoist, all different types. And I start doing shamanic work. And that's when I begin to actually be able to work with the gifts and stop going out of the body, which is what I was doing.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I got it. And plus with the sexual abuse, I know a lot of sexual abuse people go out of the body, which I did, you did. And then you have an NDE, you kind of want to go out of the body because it feels kind of good. Yep. And then but to live in this world, we have to be grounded, we have to partake, we cannot go to the target spacey. And I my first IANS thing, I was ungrounded. I had a blast because I was high and I couldn't get it together because I was my gifts were on steroids too. So I get it because we're enhanced being around one another, but it was a good feeling. It's hard to get things done like that.
Oh,
Well,
it's really hard to get things done.
yeah, because you're like, woo, it's kind of like floating like endorphins. It's like endorphins, being around other people that are like us. And I can usually tell if someone's had an NDE because I can tell it energetically how I feel around them. And I'll usually, do you know if you've had a near-death experience? They go, I don't know. I think I might. And I'm like, yeah, well, you might want to check that out. I can usually tell. So that makes total sense with a shaman. I have a close shaman friend, Kelly, that would always say, she's very grounded. We've done groundwork, prayers, blessings in my yard, and she's done rituals. And I have a favorite tree we put stones and crystals in. And she said, you're of the earth and you're always in the clouds. I went, yeah. She goes, we make a good combination. But that's good you married a Native American man. That's interesting. My relatives, my grandparents and great grandparents lived on a reservation. They're Cherokee. So that's you would think I'd be more grounded than I am. But yeah, I guess I like living there too. Well, so the shamanism, that makes total sense. So you got involved with that, which was able to ground you using your gifts.
Yeah. And then what was beautiful about it was they taught me to ground it. And then when I they were doing soul retrievals and all sorts of different work for me to help me re-embody, I was going through my traumas and releasing so much and purging so much. And that's when all three of them said, you understand, this has all been a shamanic initiation. And I'm like, what does that mean? Because I had like no intention of practicing those types of arts. I wanted to be a scientist. I was a clinician. And they were like, it's all been a shamanic initiation. And I'm like, so I have to go like study this? I have to of course, being like an academic, that's how my mind was. And they were like, no, spirit's already turned it all on. They're like, you have to learn to, ground it and to use it as a service to put it out into the world. And, that didn't resonate with me for a while because it challenged the identity that I, really thought that who I was and all of that. But with time, it did begin to make sense. And the angelics were teaching me a whole different type of vibrational medicine. So it was like the shamans were teaching me their way. So I had ceremony to ground it, but the light was teaching me its way. And, I was really through working on myself because when I was in the first 7 years of after effects, I fit the statistical profile of the ones that want to commit suicide and go home, because the trauma continued. Not with the sexual abuse, but another type of trauma unfolded. And I learned that I could suppress my gifts if I took lower vibrational substances. And because I wanted to be like everybody else, for a period of time, I would ebb and flow between like this devoted to the shamanic and doing all of that. And then, no, this is too much. I don't want to see the veil. I don't want to see between worlds. I want to just be human. And I went through periods of just really dark nights of the soul. And it eventually was really my son when at that pregnancy and feeling his energy and knowing by feeling him that he was like me, that I couldn't continue to do that to myself. And I needed to be there for him. That's Apollo in the background saying hi.
Oh, yes. You have their picture? I bet they're cute. What do they look like? They look like you or your husband?
Oh, I don't have a picture right here. Oh, it's my ex-husband now. But
okay, well, okay.
You know how it goes for NDErs. Not everybody can accept the gifts and the radical changes.
It's true. What is it? A 75% divorce rate with people that have had NDE. So
yep. And I thought I'd beat that statistic, but I did not. That said, no, one of my sons looks just like he looks like me, but he's completely dark haired and dark eyed and long hair. He wants to have his yucky hair. He calls it his power. And then my other son's very Nordic looking, blonde hair, blue eyes. So, And interestingly, I gave one a Sanskrit name and I gave one a Viking name. And I always say they're
Wow.
my balanced medicine because
I
they helped
love
me
it.
bring heaven to earth. So
Oh, Grove. That I love. I mean, Brooke, I love that name. And also, I want to talk about Grove. I have a family name. My grandmother's name was Grove, and then you're a Grove, and I think that's unusual because I never brought that up. But we're apparently. Have you ever heard of? You were on the East Coast, a Grove Park Inn.
no, I don't know
Okay,
that.
it's a very big thing. It's, the Groves are very wealthy here. We were part of that, but
Oh
then I don't
wow.
know what happened. I don't know what happened with things, but we were kind of part of that. But wow, that's beautiful about your two sons. So tell people how they can get a hold of you. You've got Brooke Grove Healing.
Yes, my website is www.brookgrovehealing, and it's Brooke with an E, as on the screen, and Grove as well, and healing as traditionally spelled. And then you can email me through there. And I have a small Instagram account, consciously private and small, because there I share my written work. And speaking of the Trinity, I believe that healing is a Trinity. You have healed, you are healing, and you are a healer. And as long as you remember those three things and you honor them in unison, you will not project your wounds onto others. And so for me,
Triangle.
yep. There you go. And so for me, I use my Instagram account, which is relatively new, to only allow in persons that really want to witness my own written work through the shadow and how I still work with my wounds. So it's a very small private account, but if you would like to follow me, you can send me a request at Brooke Grove Healing on Instagram. Please send a message or something so I can get a vibrational read, because I consciously keep it small.
I want to thank Brooke for being with us today. She's amazing, and her story is just so compelling. If you want to have more resources below for us, the suicide hotline or battered women's shelter and help, there are some links down below, and we will definitely have Brooke Grove back. Thank you again from all my heart from watching. God bless you. Have a good evening, and make sure you subscribe. Take care. Bye-bye.